First, I wanted to say, Olga, amazing job. Really, really there will be more amazing talks coming. And so, I guess we can start with Chris. Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Chris Aniszczyk, currently CTO at Williams Foundation, focused on cloud-native infrastructure, so projects such as Kubernetes, Prometheus, all this kind of modern cloud-native stuff kind of falls under my purview. I've been involved in open source for 20 plus years, from early Linux contributor to dev tools back in the day. I don't know how many of you have used something called Eclipse. I apologize for something else. But we were trying to do cloud-based development environments 15 years ago in a whole different area, but the whole developer tools in general is a super passionate area of mine, and anything we do to make it easier for people to contribute, whether you're doing a tutorial or just trying to contribute a feature to a product. I'm all for it. So I'm very excited to have this event, trying to get people talking about this in a modern setting.
Cool. Aaron?
Is there that much change in Eclipse?
Wow. I love and hate developer tools. I've never seen that, right?
That's still not my soft spot for Eclipse, but. So, Aaron Williams, I am at Fossa. We are a open source management platform, so we help companies take advantage of open source. Our whole mission is to make open source ubiquitous and to make it significantly more valuable to the companies that adopt it. The way we do that is by reducing the risk of adopting open source. So what you really want is to understand the inventory of the packages that you're dependent upon, and then be able to set up the right policies to make sure that you've got security and licensing and code quality and things like that under control across your entire environment. My background, I've been kind of setting up and running developer communities for a long time. Met Chris back when I was at Mesosphere and working in the CNCF. And so I'm just excited to be here and have a chance to talk a little bit more about what it means to set up these kinds of software supply chains and how open source plays a role in that whole thing.
Great. So now we've got who you two are. What is the software supply chain?
Are you going to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, that don't matter.
Who's that? Who's that?
Yeah, I'm Kirk, everybody. Some of you got a chance to talk to me, some of you not yet. I'm head of DevRel at Gitpod. Yeah. Unimportant. More importantly, what is the software supply chain and why does it matter? Why should we care?
I think maybe we'll have slightly different perspectives on this, but basically a supply chain, in the software context, it's basically everything you use to build a piece of software, right? That could be the development tools, that could be the dependencies, that could be the things that you run on, and so on. And it's basically ensuring full kind of prominence of that, software supply chain. And there's other industries that do this stuff, in medical devices, automotive. This is like not a new concept. I just think in software for many years we've kind of taken things a little bit for granted, where it's just like we could just go find random shit on the internet and build software at the end of the day, and hopefully no one notices that we're picking up all these things. But things have kind of improved now. There's a lot of focus, obviously, on securing the software supply chain. There's been a lot of noticeable big security incidents, from kernel Linux level, things like Spectrum Meltdown, to Log4j is kind of the famous one that has kind of hit a lot of people, and so that's bringing just a lot of attention, and not only from this traditional industry, but governments now are starting to get involved. So like the US had this secure software act that they put together a couple years ago. Part of that act was like mandating now SBOMs, software building materials, in a variety of different places. The EU is putting together some crazy regulations. So this is just top of mind for everyone these days, because everything has software in it. Fortunately, unfortunately, it's absolutely crazy. And to do a little bit of a funny story, we were building a house during the pandemic, which I don't recommend. But these days, everything you buy, like a fridge, a toaster, a toothbrush, a toilet, everything has like software in it now, and it's actually hard to find things without that. And it's just something that is pervasive all around us, and we have to ensure that all the stuff that we use is obviously secure. So we want to make sure that our oven and fridge work, or fridge. It's truly all around us.
Everything comes with open source disclosure now. Right?
It does, yeah. I was the asshole who we used to have older Mercedes that's all car, and you could actually ask the car manufacturers for a full list of all the open source that ships on it, and all your phones these days you can go find that information there. But in kind of the SDA software supply chain world, you're kind of at the center of this, because a lot of the software used today is open source, right?
Yeah.
Something like 90+%, depending which industry you're involved in, is using open source stuff, random stuff down on GitHub.
Hopefully not so random, but Chris uses a lot of random stuff. No, I think the interesting thing for me about the supply chain is, and what I think more people are coming to recognize and appreciate, is the complexity that's involved in a supply chain because of the dependencies of dependencies, and that sort of transitive nature of dependencies ends up meaning that your supply chain is significantly larger than you oftentimes think it is. And understanding what that supply chain looks like, understanding kind of what that tree looks like, and then being able to communicate that effectively out to other people that also care about what your supply chain is really hard. And as you think about the things that you're directly dependent upon, and you think about how they're actually needing to get the same level of understanding of the things they're dependent upon, that's why it's important for you to understand your software supply chain and understand kind of the complexity of it. It's not.
Okay. So no more YOLOing stuff in production.
It's still getting that big. We're truly embarrassing for just small ones. There's up team, key value source, up team lining libraries. It's just randomly choose.
Okay. Cool. So if an organization can only do one thing to improve their supply chain posture, what should it be?
Well, Chris brought the S-bomb earlier, so software bill of materials. I hate that because now I have to come up with another use of this for shit. I can't just say S-bomb anymore because it actually has a real meaning now.
So
software bill of materials is the definition of all the packages that I'm dependent upon, and in a way that's easy for you to understand and a machine to understand as well. So multiple different formats, multiple different ways of presenting that, but the idea is you have a complete and hopefully a dependable list of everything that you're dependent upon. And so if you could do one thing, or if there's a place to start, I often tell people, start by understanding what you have in your software supply chain, and the kind of output of that is typically going to be one of these software bill of materials. And so that requires you to scan everything that you are using. It requires you to understand what your dependencies look like and what your supply chain looks like, and then to produce something that is kind of a record or archive of that experience.
So file format wise, is that like a specific format? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? No?
I think they're like with any piece of software, what was the XKCD meme where it's just
we need a
new format, keep getting new formats, and so there's at least 3 or 4 kind of SBOM formats. U.S. government, at least in its cybersecurity order, has kind of said the qualities of what an SBOM format should have, and generally. Obviously, I recommend FKX by default, which is a Linux Foundation effort. We've been doing for over a decade, but there's other ones out there. The key thing is produce something under a reasonable.
And the interesting thing to me is now you're starting to get requirements that you produce it in multiple formats for multiple different audiences. Yeah. And so part of this challenge is not thinking of it as being a thing that you produce and then you're done with it, and then you put it on the shelf and you walk away from it. But instead, the capability of producing that song is the thing that you're really trying to get to.
Okay, and then it sounded like this is something you don't want people to edit after the fact. Are there any processes in place for that?
Well, it's connected to the software you're delivering, right? And as the software you're delivering changes, then the S1 will change. So yes, you shouldn't edit it after you deliver the software because those two things are connected to each other.
Ideally, it should be as seamless as something as part of your build process, and it should be integrated. And it is getting better. It is not perfect, and you need a lot of ways to kind of do this. And you're kind of really seeing the acceleration of SBOMs through kind of regulation. Governments coming in and forcing people that, hey, if you're going to sell to the feds now, you need to have SBOMs, and magically everyone gets one.
Okay. So we know what we have, but how do we improve the security posture of the open source ecosystem? How do we improve the resilience of the open source ecosystem?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time at the Linux Foundation thinking about this. We actually have a separate kind of sister organization that I help spin up called the Open Source Security Foundation, which is basically pulling a lot of money and resources from companies to kind of help answer, and deal with that problem. And I think it truly kind of, the way I look at it is a lot of people, see all this amazing software available, like either GitHub, you find basically, anything, but not all open source software is necessarily the same in terms of quality. So I think being a little bit more, selective about what you're using, I think goes, a long way. And for us at Linux Foundation, we're doing our best to educate maintainers on how to do better security practices. Like, you would not believe the amount of projects out there that there's like no way to report a security disclosure topic, nothing out there. Well, maybe that should be in your criteria of stuff to like not depend on, but the way most modern software engineering is, folks just allow you can use whatever open source software you generally can to deal with this later. So I think like education and truly understanding what you're using internally in your organization goes I think a long way. And you do not believe the amount of companies that I interact with that like cannot answer that simple question of like what you're actually using. Like, oh yeah, we have like a centralized artifact which has a bunch of stuff, but like we have other ways to kind of, so it's always a mess depending on, and I'm sure you've seen it in your.
Yeah, it's about giving a damn at the end of the day, right? Like I think developers often forget that they have a fair amount of sway in terms of what they expect from the packages that they're using, the packages that they're engaging with. And I think expecting those packages to live up to a certain quality that matches your risk quality expectations is important. I think the work that the Linux Foundation is doing to try and standardize that, or at least make it so that we can have a conversation about it in a kind of standard way, is really important and valuable. But it's going to come back to our developers really to stand up and say, no, I need to make the same level of expectation I have. I have a policy in place that says that I'm going to make sure that I'm adopting open source that actually goes the extra mile. It's worth it. You can have an impact, a bigger impact.
Got it. So it seems like we should just keep raising the standards for the integral parts of the open source ecosystem. How do we fund that? Where does the money come from for that, and where do the resources come
From you.
Yeah, no. Definitely. I don't think not for the individuals. I think it has to come from a combination of companies that are building, profitable businesses. They have to find a way to kind of, contribute back. Whether it's just donation or some type of tax. Governments also, I think, should be involved and are getting involved. We actually, just a month ago, we had our first major government grant, oddly from the German sovereign tech fund, gave €800,000 to the OpenJS Foundation, which hosts Node, jQuery, which jQuery is it literally still runs a huge chunk of website, but it's kind of improve the security of these things, and seeing governments, taking that role it's not suggesting. I think it's going to be a combination of both private sector and governments working together to kind of help do this. But I do think a lot of the role has to come from companies and just individuals. Really take a look at what you're depending on. Please, stop reinventing the wheel. Try to pull resources. We don't need 50 key value stores and let's try to consolidate a little bit more.
Yeah, we're fortunate that organizations like Linux Foundation can help us do this and help us pool our resources to solve these kinds of problems. So, encourage folks to take a look at what they're doing and to get engaged as an individual in those efforts. I think also the other side of that coin, which is the way I originally was going to answer this question, and then I stacked it because I realized this had better was more also around how do you do this internally within your organizations? Where's the investment come in your company to make this important? And I think there again, it often comes from the grassroots. It doesn't come from somebody on top saying this is important to us as a company. It often comes from the developer saying this is important to who we are and important to what we do. And I want to encourage everybody to feel like they have that responsibility internally within their organization to be able to say, we care about this. We care about understanding the things we're dependent on, making choices about the things we're dependent on.
So you're saying we need to take an active role too, while also convincing other people.
Yeah, I think pooling the investment is one thing. I think internal, what happens in your day-to-day is still, you play your role.
Investment, I think, is going to get there eventually. Like we're seeing good trends. I think the biggest stumbling block is like developers are inherently lazy in many ways. They're just going to do what they need to get their job done. Security always tends to happen last, unfortunately. And anything we do with education or using modern tools to help, whether it's an SCA tool, cloud-based development environments, are a great way to ensure that you're also developing in a secure way. So I think there's just many opportunities to really level things.
Cool.
Across the industry.
Okay, speaking of which, I think it's really not as tangible to talk in abstract about software building materials. Have you ever sat in on a security incident?
Not throughout your planning, like from like really stupid things of I guess this one was like a weird I spent all the time on Twitter before starting the Planning and Community Foundation, Linux Foundation, and we had a variety of incidents, and one that still I still laugh about this day is we kind of had a way of like publishing by binaries. We kind of had this.
Yep.
We had an internal artifactory and like a public, it's called medium.twitter.com, and we just had this funny way of publishing stuff where it was like -d publish dot internal equals true. It was just like a freaking flag, and then someone just like stripped it off and ended up just like publishing the fucking every the whole internal code base, which is like
Not a big deal at all.
not a big deal, but it's definitely a security issue at the highest order, and just like hilarious trying to scrub the whole literally everything off the internet. It just happens. Like that's just that's what happens when you let developers YOLO publishing
Right. I'm not going any
binaries. So yeah, it's security issues are just a natural course of software development. Humans are not perfect. We make mistakes, and we need to sure we have like processes and tools in place to kind of make that easier. And hopefully, everyone has had their embarrassing story.
You're looking at me as though I'm going to top that? No. That's enough embarrassing.
I hope Gitpod has some good news too.
Yeah.
You're alone in this regard.
So, changing topics. How does the CNCF approach security as another project? What bases into this?
Something about like this new foundation team in general. We're very, we have something like 2,000 members. They, a lot of companies. They fund us money to kind of ensure things are at a certain quality bar. And so what we do is, we ensure a lot of our projects are audited. Just like any other kind of internal product that you develop, there's always audit processes. You have to go work with regulators. We do that for our open source projects, and we actually share and open up all the results. So recently, we spent like a $250,000 check to do an audit for Kubernetes to ensure that is the software well built, what's the threat model. So we treat basically our open source software similar to what companies traditionally would do for a lot of proprietary products. There should be no differentiation. You should steal some of these kind of ideas from that industry, from the kind of private sector, and put it on top of our open source efforts without burdening the maintainers so much. We do a lot of modern things that we kind of implement fuzzing, which I'm not people familiar. We have
Why
fuzzing.
don't you explain fuzzing?
Fuzzing is basically just a way of running tests that kind of poke at ways to kind of break a bit of software. It's kind of like the simplest way I can say it. And there's different ways, people have written fuzzing for all different needs. And it is one way to kind of catch issues where for example, I think a Log4j incident technically probably wouldn't be caught if that code base had fuzzing implemented in it, but it is a lot of work to actually do, right? It doesn't come for free. It's not actually an easy thing to do, and companies like Google fund a lot of fuzzing efforts, but you still have to have someone kind of implement it and constantly ensure that these things are addressed.
And so, what do you think people miss the most when it comes to software security?
I think sometimes people assume that there's kind of one model for doing software security, or that there's kind of one way to think about the problem. And oftentimes, our customers come to us first thinking about it in terms of what we like to think of as airport security, where like I want to set up my gate and I only want certain things to do with certain packages to go through the gate, and if the package goes through the gate, it's because I've really examined the hell out of it and I say it's okay with me. And that's okay. Like that's a valid model for kind of managing security. But what we started to see as we start to get to greater scale is that that's not going to work across both a kind of large scale development environment and a diverse development environment. How do you actually manage a model like that and not end up ruining your developer productivity? And so we started to see the implementation of another model, which is what we call the casino model, which is everything can come in, everybody can sit down and play games, it's very open. But we've got enough cameras in the sky watching over what's happening. We've got enough information about what's happening, where if something goes wrong, we can actually fix it very quickly. And I think that model combined with an airport model where you say, for certain projects, it makes sense for us to be much more careful and maybe deal with it a bit more kind of a slower development process. But for the vast majority, we're going to do a better job of instrumenting and kind of providing observability over top of my development environment from a security perspective. We think the mix of those two things actually is going to get us where we need to go as we continue to scale. And so we started working with customers to think more about kind of how can we think about this problem not as a one-size-fits-all problem, but in a way that enables us to focus on developer productivity at the heart of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a pretty good answer. I think from a lot of companies that we work with at the Linux Foundation, I think a lot of them are still kind of new to software, right? There's this whole thing for new industries, whether it's automotive, aerospace, they're all starting to get into software now. And I think a lot of folks don't realize how diverse and complex the open source software supply chain is. There's that, I'll mention my other, I did the XKC comment earlier, but there's another kind of meme where it's like almost like a Jenga thing, right? Where things are all kind of built on each other. And like, hey, this little, library is managed and developed by some, researchers at some university. That's somewhat true. Like that's actually kind of the natural state of things. And, letting people know that they have a role to kind of play in addressing this problem, whether it's like funding or reevaluating, how they depend on software, or like depend on things that may not be in that, situation. I think is kind of the hidden kind of secret that a lot of folks, don't know about, and kind of there's a shared role in us helping fix all these things. We're doing our best to educate, but it is very difficult to kind of convince people to solve these problems because security is interesting where people generally have to feel pain.
Yes.
Right. And if you're not going to be deposed in front of government or Congress or on the hook because you're going to lose much $1 million because whatever you get company gets hacked, you really don't care. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's kind of the default situation, unfortunately, for a lot of folks. Okay. Because we're trying to change that mindset.
You talk about these different industries too. And one of the things that surprised me when I joined FOSSA was the diversity of companies that care about this problem. We have a well-known candy company, and when I first saw it on our NASCAR list of logos, I was like, "That's not the candy company, is it?" They were like, "Yeah, that's the candy company." And it goes back to what I was saying before. Like there are people at that company that care very deeply about security, and they care about making sure that the software that the candy company is producing is done in the right way. And I think that really kind of leads back to it's not about like the industry putting some kind of mandate on them to go do it. It's not about like something coming external to say you've got to go and care about this stuff. It really comes down to the developers wanting to do the right thing, wanting to do not just the right thing by their software, but the right thing by the open source community, wanting to be a good kind of member of, steward of that. And that's really inspiring to me. I think we see a lot of that in the open source community. It's something that really kind of binds us together, which I really like.
Cool. So, we have time for one question, otherwise I have another question. Oh, right here, fascinating one here.
Hi, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you think about the software supply chain in the stage of generative AI with code comes from models that you can trace back exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
How do you come against all of this?
Yeah.
You could have, the provenance of models in general is super fascinating, at least in the open source world. We have some interesting kind of lawsuits and discussions happening of like whether these tools can be used. Like currently, we don't have a formal policy at the Linux Foundation, CNCF, but I know many companies have banned these tools because of that issue.
There's too many open questions.
Yeah.
Is the answer. And it's not even just open questions in terms of, you're right, like this is some new interesting thing now that's getting injected into my supply chain. But like there literally isn't any legal precedent for us to understand how to handle some of these questions. So two lawyers that you should pay attention to. One, Heather Meeker, second, Kate Downing. They are both really good at understanding the open source community as a whole, and they started to talk about and think about the problems that involved with generative AI. And having to point you to some of the things they said about, look, you should be careful right now because we don't have enough precedent to know kind of what the right answer is. While at the same time, like the cat is basically out of the bag because we're 6 to 9 months away from having any kind of formal declaration. So it's going to be really hard to stuff that cat. Recommendation, if you reach out to me, Aaron at Fossa.com, I will send you Heather Meeker's latest book. It's called Open Source for Business. Really good primer on kind of how open source is being used, and then I'll point you to a blog post that talks about kind of the addendum to that, thinking about generative AI. It's the right question, and it's the thing that I'm thinking about a lot, and I just wish we had a better answer.
Yeah, and like, back to my point, developers are lazy, so like, they're gonna use this stuff anyway, and we're just gonna have to figure out how to deal with it. And we're doing our best, the Linux Foundation, working with a lot of these companies to say like, hey, if you're gonna use these tools, at least have good open source practices. Like, please give me the actual provenance of the model and what you actually trained it on. So the open source spirit, what do we like to do? We like to use stuff all over, but we also like to attribute to like where we got this from, right? That's like core ethos, and these tools have to support that at a basic level. And some of them do, like Amazon, I think launched Code Whisperer, and they kind of are very specific. The future may hold where we may have more like locally trained models and specific things that we allow versus like a massive corpus of just random shit that you have no idea where it comes from.
We'll have to.
Yeah. But developers are using this stuff anyway, and I was like, hey, you technically shouldn't be using it. It doesn't matter. Like, it's the way the world works, unfortunately.
You want to get something done, you gotta get it done.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Aaron.